All right. It is, 6:01. We'll call the Health and Human Services Committee meeting to order. We'll note that we have members Cindy Marks and Sarah Couple, and Councilman Rader was already excused from attending tonight. So first, we have minutes. So I will move to approve the minutes without necessity of reading. All right. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. And that passes. So we will move on to our main event, which is the Equus Group. Director Barry, did you want to tee this up at all?
Thank you very much. So the Anti-Racism Task Force went through a thorough and comprehensive RFP process looking for a partner for the city to complete a racial equity plan. The Equius Group, which came very highly regarded and known in the Northeast Ohio area and all over the country, in fact, thankfully submitted a reply for us. And the Anti-Racism Task Force went through, did their due diligence, and landed on Equius as their preferred partner in the racial equity plan. So we're very happy to have Erica Merritt and Alicia Love here tonight from Equius Group to go over their history, and they generously provided a nice presentation for everybody, and we can answer any kind of questions or anything at the end.
Or red?
There we go.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay. Yeah, nothing was happening with the light, so I wasn't sure. So I am Erica Merritt, and I'm founder and president of Equius Group. Thank you so much for having us this evening. So my teammate.
Good evening. My name is Alicia Love, and I am project director and consultant with Equius Group, and we're excited to be here with you all.
Thank you. So we thought we would talk through our presentation and, of course, entertain any questions that you might have along the way or once we wrap up. So this is our plan. Like, we did the intro, and we want to give you an overview of the project itself and our approach to it. And then we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. That sound good? Awesome, thank you. So, Chad, thank you so much for that description. We are a Black woman-owned organizational development firm here in Northeast Ohio. And we have had the pleasure of working with lots of amazing institutions and organizations throughout Northeast Ohio and beyond. We have been around since 2018 and in a full-time capacity anyway. And really, this is why we exist. So we do work with communities and organizations, and we do that through systems change, capacity building, and cultural transformation. And our work really exists because we want to make our personal contribution as an organization to creating a more just and equitable world. And we know that we're a small part of that, but happy to be a part of it at all. We do that work one organization at a time and one human at a time. So that's a little bit about who we are as an organization. And this is who we are as a team. So you have 2 of 4 of our team members, and this is us. Sure. I don't know where to look. I'm looking over here, I'm looking over there. So I am a native Clevelander and born and raised actually in Warrensville Heights. And for most of my life, I lived here, besides a brief stint in terms of my education, my undergraduate education. And I love this city deeply. I want to see it thrive. Most of my career has been spent in the nonprofit and educational institution space, doing work around organizational development, around leadership development, and around diversity, equity, and inclusion. My educational background is maybe interesting in that my undergrad was in public relations, which actually comes in handy often. And my graduate degree is in organizational psychology with a certification in diversity management. And that's a little bit about me.
Hi, I just celebrated this feels so close, third Equiusversary 2 weeks ago. Although Erica and I go back longer than that, I've been part of the Equius team as employee number 2 for 3 years. My background is actually in the corporate world, 20 blah, blah, years, almost 25 years in corporate HR as an HR business partner, primarily working with executive leadership teams at the intersection of looking at organization development, talent management, all the way from performance through succession and leadership development. And really that organization development and sitting on leadership teams, part of that is that really got to be a part of all aspects of the organization. So, organization development is really systems work, looking at organizations as communities, as systems. So we like to say that means that we aren't going to stay in our traditional lane. We work with organizations. And my background undergraduate is in engineering and management, and my master's degree is in human resources. I am not a native. I like to say I'm American by birth and Southern by the grace of God, but Clevelanders have allowed me to be here for 18 years. Don't hold it against me. I live in Cleveland Heights, so on the other side of town. And I am too very much committed to the city, to its thriving and its growth. It gets to be a real part of you at core. Whether it's working with the nonprofits, we do work with communities and neighborhoods and really helping them thrive. So that's a little bit about me.
So the purpose of our work really is around developing this racial equity plan for the city of Lakewood and supporting you all in not just having a plan, but being able to operationalize racial equity and advance yourselves as an anti-racist institution and community. We think the plan is an important, obviously that's the deliverable, if you will, at the end of this process, and that piece is really important, but a plan can be just that. And so one of the other things that we know is really important is bringing people along. And so really zeroing in on the capacity building piece and building buy-in around this work so that by the time we get to a point where there is an actual plan, you have people who are excited about operationalizing it, about bringing it to life, about moving the work forward. And we think about that both in terms of people who are actually working for the city, but also people in the community as well. And we see this work as connected to other work that the city of Lakewood has been doing already. And so I think that, think about the work that you all did with the Center for Community Solutions just last year as a great intersection to this work and an opportunity to continue to build upon the good work that you've already started. And so here are objectives. I just think I really just made the point around the first piece. The next one is, the first piece, of course, to support the city, also to support the Anti-Racism Task Force, who we see as partners in this work, really supporting them, supporting their capacity to address, engage, and lead around this work, and to be able to center equity in their and inclusion in their decision-making processes as well. And I mentioned the Lakewood Community Health Needs Assessment work as well. So there are some really, you already have a strong foundation. You have a strong foundation in having some people that are deeply committed to moving this work forward, in the folks in the Anti-Racism Task Force and others within the city and the community that have been champions around this work, and then the research and the assessment that you have already completed. So I'm going to pass the baton over to my partner here.
So just at a high level, there's no magic in this. The magic is in how we operationalize this. But really there is a discovery phase, an analysis, recommendations, and then the actual plan with ongoing project management. And just hit the highlights here. We will work really, really closely with the Anti-Racism Task Force. There will be a lot of work sessions so that we're doing this work with them, working with the administration, working with Chad and Laura, and status meetings as necessary, both in person and written. So these are just the things that happen all along. We will kick it off with a work session with the ATRF, so it'll probably be a half a day. There's some learning so that we'll get grounded in it and continue to go from there. So discovery is really a data gathering process, long and short, and it's really where we connect with internal and external stakeholders. It's where we will review the city's policies and practices and looking at and examining those through a racial equity and an equity lens to identify those things that are supporting this work already, the real assets, and then where are some opportunities and challenges to, at the end of the day, create a more equitable and inclusive community for Lakewood residents and its visitors. And so we do this through a series of one-on-one interviews, is a lot of this one-on-one interviews. So we'll be interviewing with department leaders, division leaders. So we will have those interviews. We plan on having one-on-one interviews with you all, City Council, and the Judge Ness. And then we will also have meetings, so with the Community Relations Advisory Commission and the new Community Health Action Team. I think I got that right. That's the name of it. As well as we will talk with the Center for, that really should be the Center for Community Solutions. I think I was getting mixed up. Really specifically the Lakewood team, because one of the things that happened is we were in a process of putting together this proposal when the report came out. And so in reading this report, we're like, wow, these are some of the same focus groups that we would have had or that we did have originally. And we ask 80%, 85% of the same questions. So we went back at it and said, there's no need to do that. Let's build on that work. And when we look at external stakeholder groups that we'll talk to, we'll look at where might there be gaps. And in sitting and working with them, as you know, there's always a lot more data that gets presented. And so working with them to really go through the rest of the data, looking at bringing in partnership, other community organizations such as Lakewood Alive, the schools, the recreation department, the library, the Healthy Lakewood Foundation, the Three Arches Foundation, your other funders, I'm going to get the bank wrong because I didn't write it down in front of my face. First Federal Bank. So we'll work with the ARTF and with Chad and the mayor to outline those organizations, because one of the things is, in addition to understanding information, as Erica talked about, how do we use this process to build partners and champions for this work, as well as aligning with efforts and things that these organizations may be doing in service to the community. And then again, if we find that there are gaps, we could have focus groups with citizen affinity groups such as the Lakewood Black Caucus, again, if needed, once we go through more data with the Center for Community Solutions, again, if that's necessary. So, and then we'll do best practices research with other municipalities and cities and understanding what they're doing. And all of this will be part of the discovery process. And I think another thing that we think is important in this is that in working with the divisions and the departments, we really want to position, because this work is, how can it support them to do their work better? And really go into it with positivity with all of the departments and the divisions. And then we'll go through an analysis process, really consolidating the inputs from discovery to identify those assets and opportunities. The usual, we'll draft preliminary findings. We will have work sessions with the ARTF to really help us develop those draft findings. So one of the things that we're not doing, that we don't like to do, is sort of collect data and then go into that back room where consultants do their thing and here you go, here's some findings, here's a report, because that's great, but it's not great at helping you build capacity. So we'll be working with the ARTF throughout this process, so they're learning how we're doing it, and they can continue to apply those lenses. Then we do what we call meeting-making sessions, or I should say meeting-making interviews, is once we have the findings and we've drafted them with the mayor and the admin departments, is we'll go back and we'll say, here are our findings, what might we not know? Because we know that not being in ecosystems, we'll know the data really well, but what else do we need to know? And this is not about rationalizing the data, it's really about contextualizing the data so that when we finalize our findings and we go to recommendations, we make sure that we really understand what we need to do so that those will, be spot on. I should go back. One of the things that could potentially happen is there are times where you will do a findings validation with select external stakeholders. So again, like we've done that meeting making internally to make sure we understand any nuance. We may find that when we get there that there may be a limited stakeholders that we want to do that findings with. One of the things about these projects is that they're relatively organic in nature. You get into it and something will say, oh, we should do this, we should do that based on a finding. So I put that asterisk there, is it may happen, it may not. It really depends on how the findings are shaking out and what AARTF and the administration feel that we want to do. And then we will go to develop recommendations. And this is not the detailed plan, but here are the recommendations and the things that we think you should focus on. We will, of course, be reviewing these with the division and department leaders, with the administration, with council committees if necessary. Our work with one of the city Solons has been a little bit different, so the council structures and who we need to work with. This point, we will want to solicit feedback from the external stakeholders, probably the same groups that we did discovery with, because we also think it's very important that if someone is going to give you and go through the trouble of talking to you and providing you information, that you close the loop with those people who have taken their time for you. And this is an opportunity to do that, and then based on that information, finalize the recommendations. The other reason I think it's really important, both on the finding side and the recommendation side, is to go back to sort of that stakeholder groups, is you need to make sure that the differences that we make will make a difference. And often we find in this work that we'll do things, and our organization partners will do things that'll help them do different things, but at the end of the day, those different things didn't make a difference for the populations that they're trying to help. So keeping that connection and that outside in and inside out look is one of the ways to help ensure that this will move the needle on the work that you want in the ways that you all want. And then we will develop the detail of the plan, of the action plan, with concrete action steps, who has ownership for them, and sort of the timing, but recognizing that this is not something, this is a long game. This is not something that's going to happen in 2 years. And you'll want to roll out these sort of recommendations in a way that makes sense with the timing of what's going on else with priorities, and as they're aligned to the recommendations out of the needs assessment action plan. So we could just even preliminarily look at that and see, oh, there's probably going to be some alignment around here and alignment around that. So we want to make sure at the end of the day, these things are all coming together. That's it.
Well, thank you very much for that overview and sharing a little bit. I know I've jotted down quite a few questions, and I'm excited to dig into this. It's been something I've been looking forward to for a long time to get started with this, so I'm glad we're got some momentum. So on that, I wanted to start with, what is the timeline? I know you went through like the sort of overarching timeline, but you mentioned that you're going to work with the ARTF on kind of more high-level timeline and start with a launch meeting with them, and that the half-day thing. Do you have a timeline for when that starts?
We
or-
don't. So the overall project will probably take 18 to 24 months. When we kick off with HRF, kind of depends on when we finalize the contract process and then get a chance to get them scheduled. So we are really hoping that will happen late summer, August, early September. We are out the first part, our organization, we're down, we're closed for the first week of July. And then Erica will be out for most of July, all of July, not most of July. So it'll probably be in August once we get through this process.
Great. And then, you know, I noticed in your, as we were talking, and also in your proposal about looking at both individual and structural aspects of this, you know, in the community as well. So in terms of structural, you mentioned policies and procedures, but not ordinances. Are you reviewing?
We would put all of those together
together.
into policies and procedures and your documents and your data.
Okay, so actual
Given
laws.
that we're not lawyers,
Okay.
we'll do our best
Right.
to look at those, and that is a volume of information. So we will depend on the ARTF and Chad and Laura to help us understand where is the biggest bulk of area that we want to focus on.
Distilling that, I think, is going to be really important, because I can only imagine that each of these departments and potentially divisions, I have to keep that straight in my head, have their own particular policies, practices, procedures, and so that distilling piece is going to be important.
Right. I think that's one of the, as I've been thinking about this, and when we talk about institutions, we're talking about the people in them, the, you know, the policies and procedures can be set by an administration, but the laws are set by council, but then that can change, you know, as the electeds change. And so trying to think about this as a long-term, you know, process and how we work on that.
I think one of the other really important things to note is, so often the way that inequities show up, it's not always the way the policy or it's not the way it's written, right? It may be written great, but how's it being carried out? And so I think that's part of the way that the ARTF can be really helpful to us in zeroing in and saying, like, where, and the other folks that we are talking to, like, what's bubbling up and what is that connected to? And so how do we draw a line between the experiences that people are having or not having, or things that are going on in the community, and how that might tie to a policy, practice, ordinance, et cetera.
I have a few more, but I'm going to see if any of my colleagues here, Councilwoman Marks, did you have any?
Thank you very much for being here. I've been excited to hear about how we can move forward with equity, and so I'm glad you're here. You said that you've been engaged since 2018, is that correct? You've been a business since
Yes.
2018? And have you worked with other cities?
We have done some work with other cities. Yes, Solon was one that we mentioned. Also done some work with the city of Shaker Heights, though that work concentrated much more with the school district than it did with the city as a whole, but some.
Could you
And Solon
describe?
is primarily externally focused. We have helped them set up their internal committee and task force. We've been doing training for the leadership team, and then this last bit of work is really external facing for them. We've done focus groups externally and supporting them in developing their DEI plan for the city.
That's exactly what I was looking for, so thanks for sharing that. So I'm glad you're here, thanks. I'm really looking forward to working with the Anti-Racism Task Force and you, as well as people within the community, because Lakewood's a great place, and we want to make sure that everybody feels safe and included in this city.
Baker?
Thank you both, and thank you for the Health and Human Services Department and the Anti-Racism Task Force for bringing this forward. And kind of along the same lines of Councilwoman Marx's questions, I'm looking through your proposal and just some of your clients, and it's an impressive list. A lot of it's, and I'm wondering, and perhaps as someone who's not as familiar with kind of like the development of a racial equity plan, so I guess this is kind of a little bit of a two-part question. One is, a lot of it's like DEI consulting, which I understand, and in my organization that I work for, my day job, Metro Parks, does some of that. But I'm wondering if there's a difference between like developing a DEI plan and then, kind of what we're doing now, right? So a racial equity plan. So could you explain if that's different and like kind of what that means and what the recommendations might be and how they're different, I guess?
Sure.
Or are they different?
Sure. So we do make a distinction, and I know it's made more complex by what I would call a little bit of alphabet soup that we're living in this moment. So one, there's a strange way that DEI is less of an acronym these days and more of almost a word, where we don't suss out those are three discrete concepts. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so there's that, and then racial equity. And so sometimes it's racial equity and diversity and inclusion. Sometimes it is solely focused. Our work is solely focused on racial equity. And then I'll, just add another layer and say some institutions which you all have the Anti-Racism Task Force being very explicit around that. So I think one of the distinctions that I would do partially by talking about, well, what is racial equity in the first place, which, we in the simplest form define as getting to a point where race is no longer a factor in determining how one will fare, right? One's success or one's failure. And so what are the structures that we need to put into place to either interrupt the ways in which that is the way in which race is playing a factor in a negative way, or what are the things that we need to be thinking about to increase the probability, like providing the supports that people might need because of historic and present marginalization. So I think the way that we racial equity is not the same as focusing more broadly on diversity, right? It is a very explicit focus on race and interrupting racism. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is much more broad, right? And includes the many ways. If we think about diversity as human difference, then we're talking about race, yes, but also gender, also sexual orientation, also disability status, also socioeconomic status. I hesitated a little because we would not ignore other things, right? So even though this is a racial equity plan and that is the focus, we would not ignore other kinds of inequities that we might suss out as a result of this work. And we understand that none of us only embody a single identity. And so we see this work as intersectional as well. And so sometimes it's, in particular, I think an easy one is often you don't know what's operating, right? Sometimes it's class, sometimes it's race and class, sometimes it's race, class, and gender. And so in those places where we feel like is playing out around intersections, we will be explicit about that.
Thank you, and that's helpful, and kind of understanding, as a entering suburb, in a larger metro area, are there other communities across the country that are similar to Lakewood that you think should be held out as a model for how they've done racial equity planning? And maybe, because I'm just interested in this subject and would love to kind of read more about it, and I'm excited to get started with you all, but I just, understanding kind of the intricate interplay between systems, what we can do, what we don't have the power to do, what we can kind of push forward, where we may need to work with partners to push forward. Is there a community that you would say this community has done it well and, hold it out as a model?
So I'm smiling because I think I have a bunch of thoughts. One of them is that that's part of the research work we'll be doing. Another one is that, interestingly, and maybe not surprisingly, when you read a lot of, and this isn't so much a racial equity plan as it is like communities that are held up as, in some ways, getting the racial dynamic kind of integration thing right. The community that comes up most often in the data is a neighbor to the east. So the city of Shaker Heights comes up a lot. I think for those of us who live here, and this is in no way a knock on Shaker Heights, but just knowing that there is no perfect community, and that this work is always going to be a moving target in some ways, in that I don't think there's a place that you get to where you're done. I think there's always a sort of work in progress.
Yeah, and that's it. You brought up Shaker Heights, and I guess I was thinking kind of like more nationally, but it is interesting, and I respect that community.
I'm sorry, not to interrupt, well, I am interrupting you, but I just want to add to that and say, when you look at national models, Shaker Heights is held up nationally. So other cities across the country are looking to the city of Shaker Heights.
Yeah, and that's borne out in the New York Times and where they're written up, and I respect the difficult conversations they have there, because when you hear it talked about in the public realm and also probably within the city and school district in Shaker, they're having difficult conversations, and I think that's part of what this is, and I look forward to having some of those, even if I'll be uncomfortable, because I think you need to get there to kind of think about where you're going. So I appreciate you guys.
And if you're looking for, you just talked about wanting to learn more, just to throw out one resource is the Government Alliance on Racial Equity, GARE. It is an organization that is governments, municipalities, and it was formed from Race Forward and Pro-Inspire and organizations, and that is what they focus in. And in their reports and public-facing documents, there are examples of different plans, things that different cities are doing, some of best practices, and we keep that. Sometimes it depends on what the issues are in a city, so you always want to look at best practices, but we look at not just the city level, but what was the issue that the gap they were trying to close, and what are the examples of other municipalities that are closing that gap well. But that's a good general resource to if you just television is boring, let me see something else. Yeah.
Well, and that triggers for me that Seattle is another city that you'll often see kind of along that same vein, and that has quite a bit of a structure around, or at least has had quite a bit of a structure around their racial equity work as a municipality.
Thank you. Because I see it in some places, like the city of Cleveland, their finance committee is now called their Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion and Finance Committee. But that's a little bit more outward facing, and it'd be more interesting to see the kind of the real meat and potatoes of the report. So I'm looking forward to working with you all.
Thank you. So I have a couple more questions. One of the things I think about as with this work is that it's not just city policy, right? We're talking about the community. And so we have that with some of our other, community health action team work. On a smaller, the tree advisory and education board, we have a tree plan that involves the community planting a certain number of trees, and how do you get people to plant trees on their private property, for instance. So we're kind of in that same vein thinking about work in the community beyond city employees, city policy procedures. Can you talk a little bit about, in some of the other places you've worked, or some thoughts about how does that even begin to happen, or how do we influence that, or what is that long-term strategic? I know we haven't done the work yet, so I'm not pinning you to any specific thing here, but I'm just curious how that works.
That is a couple of reasons. One, why working with other community organizations is really important. So what are they doing? What is happening in the schools, if that works for your municipality? What is happening in some of the other organizations? You just mentioned environmental, and you often hear there is no environmental justice without racial justice. If you look at the way resources have been pulled out of communities or not done. So all of those things we hope we will get an idea of in looking at your partner organizations. What else is happening in the community? That's why I said it's a little bit of an organic process, because one time you'll tug on this string and it'll come up, oh, well, we've got this going on with this environmental group. And just having worked, this would be Erica, who knows everybody, in this community and our clients, we love to go, oh yeah, this and this and this, that, may with an environmental group or those that we know who might be working in this area, in this space, by the geographic space, how do we get alignment? And if that means that the project goes a little bit longer so that we could pull other things into our recommendations, or segue our recommendations to some environmental work, again, it's one of the reasons that we asked the Anti-Racism Task Force and Chad to give a little longer to submit the proposal until we could really kind of chomp through the data in the community health needs assessment, because we wanted to see where there was those hooks early on and where they identified the data. But I think that is absolutely right. How does it all fit together? How does the parks plan fit together? Because again, as Erica said, yes, there is a focus on racial equity or centering the experiences and the humanities of people of color, but there are also other identities that are really very important. So what's coming out of the ADA work and how you can align those. So that is part of why we do that, going out to the community organizations that are not a part of the government.
I also think about, and I don't know if this is where you were going, but when you were talking about trying to get people to plant trees, I think about, you know, what role can folks play as neighbors, right? Or people who share this community, what role can they play, right, in ensuring that this feels like an equitable and inclusive place? While that is not like the center of our work, I think there will be things that come out of our conversations with people in the community that speak to that. And, you know, as we hear those things, I could easily imagine, you know, there being some piece around like what people at a more grassroots level could be doing as well.
Yeah, yeah, great. And that kind of leads into, you know, we were talking about capacity building. So part of the report, the roadmap, no, plan.
Proposal,
Plan, okay.
that thing.
That thing. We'll make recommendations about, because, you know, this isn't, like you said, it's not something that we're going to fix with a 4-year, 5-year, you know, work. So to set us up to continue this work, so that will include staffing recommendations, or what kind of
could.
could?
I think
Yeah.
it's important. This work is primarily externally facing. So we will look at policies, practice, procedures, ordinances, all the things as they impact your residents and visitors. It is not as much about the internal environment for the city, and we've had some conversations around that, and these things will come up. So yes, it could be about staffing differences. You could say different ordinances. It could be transportation, which again, you'll see these overlapping issues in a community. So how does, whether it be redlining, how bus lines work, how are they impacting people's ability to live in a community where they feel accepted, where we can work, where we can have good paying jobs? All of those things will come into play.
Okay. Any other questions from colleagues? Councilman Baker.
Yeah, and thank you. This just came into my mind, and I, as far as outreach goes, I would suggest, and you probably have it in your proposal, I just didn't see it, or would be interested in kind of your thoughts on the matter, is Lakewood's known to have a big refugee population. Now, you know, when I was growing up, it was a lot of Eastern European. Now it's a lot of Asian and Pacific Islanders. So just curious if kind of outreach to those communities and maybe Asia Services, Inc. and kind of that stuff, how that would go into your data gathering and then ultimate plan.
So I think again that there will have to be some conversations and some choices around who it is that we talk to. That list, you know, hearing you say that feels like a community that we don't want to leave out of the conversation. How we approach them, you know, will probably depend. But I hear you saying Asia Inc. and another connection. We have connection to that organization as well. And so I could imagine making that happen, and also being thoughtful about where there might be. One of the things that we have found, and one of the things that we found in our work with the city of Solon, was that connecting with people through organizations and structures where they already were connected in, and that there were people that they already had trusted relationships with, that seemed to work really well in being able to make those connections and make sure that those voices were a part of the conversation.
Then I would suggest, I know the Lakewood soccer team, you know, I think there's, you know, tens of different languages that the children's, you know, households speak, and it's kind of a great community. And then Madison Public Library, a lot of the refugee students go there after school for some tutoring and stuff like that. So those may be some structures that may help you engage with those communities.
Thank you.
Marks.
Thank you. feeding off of something that Councilman Baker said, I'm the council person for Ward 4, which is the ward that has the greatest diversity. We have a lot of refugees. And I've tried to reach out to some of the refugee population myself, and I do find that they're not as trusting, especially of city government. And depending on where they're from, I mean, some of them come from very difficult situations. So I agree with Councilman Baker that getting them integrated into the community through resources that they already trust. And I do see a lot of the Asian population walking down my street, and they're very reticent to even say hello to you, and I respect that because I'm sure that they're fearful and they don't feel included. So I would love to see that engagement occur in our community, because I think Lakewood is very welcoming, but sometimes we don't know how to reach out to them so they feel that welcomeness from the community itself. So I'm excited to have you participate at that level. And I agree, Madison Library is a place where a lot of the children go, and it's kind of a safe haven for them as well. So I'll probably be seeing a lot of you in Ward 4, happy to say.
So I want to make sure we have time. I see members of the ARTF here, and I know we have a comment from ARTF co-chair Laura Rodriguez Carbone in our e-comment, and I don't know if any of you would like, we don't have a sign-out sheet, but if anybody would like to make a public comment, you may, you don't have to. Okay. No? Okay. Okay. I knew you couldn't resist. I knew it. Someone has to, right? Welcome.
Good? Okay, so do I need to say where I live and stuff? Okay. My name's Kate McBride. I'm a member of the Anti-Racism Task Force, and I just want to say how happy I am that we finally got to this point, and we've been so excited about getting the work going with Equius Group and what they're going to be able to help us develop for our community. I really appreciate the question about what's the difference between DEI efforts and anti-racism efforts, and the explanation that we are focused on anti-racism, but we will also be certainly aware of intersectionality and other groups that show themselves as, trying to think of the right word, as this work grows and evolves, that we're not going to ignore anyone, but our focus is on race. And I think that's really important, and I'm really happy that our city has decided to focus like that, because many, many cities have DEI efforts and task force and programs, and this is, in my mind, extremely important, and I'm glad that we're focusing on it specifically. And I'm glad that we have Equius Group to help us dig in. And as I hear you both speaking, I think I'm so glad that you have the words to say so many of the things that we all think about and feel, and you're able to concisely and succinctly deliver the message. So that's it. I'm excited, and I hope we're on the verge of moving forward here so that we can get going in this important work. Thank you all.
All right, thank you. So any other, oh, yeah, come on up, Laura.
Hi. So yeah, I left a glowing recommendation for both of you for the company, in my e-comment, but I also wanted to kind of comment on some of the outreach commentary that you shared, Cindy. The ARTF is a resource. I myself have 20 years of experience in outreach to communities of color. All of us come from, we're all multidisciplinarians. We come from diverse backgrounds. And so if there is a want to reach out to diverse communities, we can always point you in the right direction if you're not sure on what to say or how to approach them. Again, each community is different. What they find to be comfortable is different. Also, the messenger matters, and you know, the grace in which you are relaying that message. So definitely, you know, please reach out to us. We want you to talk to people of color. Whether or not they live in your ward, it's important. It will make them feel more of part of the community. And I do get there's a lot of mistrust of government entities, but I think anything we can do to bring these folks out to community events and kind of help them to see that there is a structure to where they can feel safe and included, I think that's going to be helpful in making that connection. And we'd be happy to do that for you. Thank you.
I knew you couldn't resist. I knew it.
Okay, Angeline Steiner, co-chair of the Anti-Racism Task Force, and I didn't want to get up here because I think that Erica and Alicia have just done an amazing job, and I did not want to steal their thunder. And they, just as Kate has said, they have just so wonderfully put what we have been trying to work towards for these past 2 years and just put it perfectly where it's like, that is what we've been talking about. That is what we've been saying. So I just want to bring up 2 points, going back again to the racial equity versus DEI, and just affirming that that is so important. DEI has been around for a while. We've had these diversity conversations, but you really can't have DEI until you really begin to look at your structures that are in place that's preventing diversity, equity, inclusion, and actually accessibility and belonging. So that's another conversation piece that we'll have to add in there and talk about as well. The other thing, I want to go back to sort of the grassroots and your question, Sarah, with what can the community do? Is there a way for the community to be involved in this? And absolutely, they can. And I think we see that a little bit with the Madison Court Community Coalition and what we're doing with our monthly Block Party events, which the next one is July 22nd, Equius, and August 19th. And really what I've talked about with community members is that is sort of my vision of Lakewood. When you see that just beautiful diversity of people and young people and older people and just everybody just there having fun. In Madison Park itself is just a great opportunity to sort of see sort of the organic Lakewood community. You'll see sort of all the diversities of Lakewood. And, you know, depending upon the spots you go in Lakewood, you'll get sort of pockets of what Lakewood looks like. But I really do think that Madison Park, again, it's in the 4th Ward, for the city, is really sort of gives you that picture of what is Lakewood and what does that look like. So thank you again for being here this evening to talk about the plan. I'm really excited to see this get going. It's going to be a lot of work, but I think as with everything else that we've been putting out, community health needs assessment, we've got the climate action plan. I think the racial equity plan is going to really tie all of those pieces together nicely. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. All right. So yeah, and thanks for bringing up. I meant to come back to that, circle back to the climate action plan as we were talking about the trees and how everything circles together. But the climate action plan would also be important for you to connect with. So, although I'm sure Chad and Laura will get you connected with all the various different plans that we have in the city. So we don't really have anything to refer out, right? We're just learning now. Oh, and the other question I had was, so once it's gone through the whole process that you just described, does it come back to, how does it become the city's plan? Does it come back to council? It's just, I mean, that's traditionally what's happened, but I didn't see that listed, so I'm looking.
Yes, I believe it'll be the exact same as many of our other plans. It'll be brought back to council. The report will be available for everyone to review, and it'll go into the record. And then we will probably have a lot more work to do with the Anti-Racism Task Force and whatever it looks like moving into the future. But yes, it will definitely come back before council and the community.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, thank you so much for being here. We're excited to get going with this work, and thank you to the Anti-Racism Task Force for all you do and for being here again tonight. And there's no further business before committee, so we are adjourned.